Hi class, my name is Rachel Cummings, and today I'm going to be speaking with you about the theory of cognitive dissonance. Now, cognitive dissonance was first introduced in 1957 by Leon Festinger in his book, A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance. The theory was a breakthrough in social psychology and is still considered one of the most important theories. Now, dissonance is aroused when people perceive a discrepancy between their behavior and their personal standards for competence and morality. The reduction of dissonance is aimed at maintaining these self-beliefs through justification of the behavior. Now, in order to fully understand cognitive dissonance, we first need to define what a cognition is. Now, a cognition is any knowledge, opinion, or belief about the environment or oneself. So to sum it up, an individual is going to strive toward consistencies between these cognitions. And when there is an inconsistency, it will cause dissonance. There are three assumptions that are made about cognitive dissonance. The first is that humans are sensitive to inconsistencies between their actions and their beliefs. The second assumption is that recognition of the inconsistency will cause dissonance and will motivate an individual to resolve it. And the third assumption is that dissonance will be resolved by one of three ways: either changing your beliefs, changing your actions, or changing your perceptions. Now, in order to change your beliefs, it wouldn't be quite so easy. That would be deciding that if you felt bad about telling a lie, that you could just completely change your beliefs and decide that lying isn't wrong. Now, changing your actions would be to say, I just will never lie again. And that'll lessen your dissonance because you've convinced yourself that you just won't do it again. And the third would be changing your perception, which is actually just rationalizing it. Well, I told the lie because I had to. It wasn't so bad. Nobody got hurt. The most popular example of cognitive dissonance would be Leon Festinger and James Carl Smith's cognitive components of forced compliance experiment. Now, in this experiment, they took students and had them do a very boring task. And then some of them, they paid $1, and some of them, they paid $20. And they told them to go tell another student that the task was not boring, but was actually exciting and enjoyable. And then they saw which ones experienced the most dissonance. Now, the ones who received $20 didn't experience much dissonance because they figured, I got $20 out of this. They could rationalize it. They could feel better about themselves because it was a higher reward. Now, those who received less of an award, just receiving $1, felt more dissonance because $1 for lying to these students, they couldn't rationalize it. Another example of dissonance would be smoking. Everyone knows that smoking is bad for you, and yet so many people do it. Why? Well, maybe they just convinced themselves that they would rather live an enjoyable life than a long life. Another example would be buyer's remorse. When someone goes and purchases a car when maybe they had a great vacation planned, they experience remorse. They wish they hadn't bought the vehicle because they actually would rather go on this trip. That's the same idea. They're experiencing dissonance. Now let's discuss some strengths and weaknesses that are found within the theory. Now, the forced compliance experiment that I described to you, done by Festinger and Carl Smith in 1959, is considered one of the biggest strengths of the theory because it was the first experiment done in a lab setting that actually proved the theory. Now, it is agreed that cognitive changes are motivated in nature, and that the source of this motivation is a form of psychological discomfort. Now, there have been many experiments done, and even when there were some weaknesses found, it still always fit into the foundation of the theory and into all three of the assumptions that were described to you earlier. Now on to some of the weaknesses of the theory. Currently, the major area of disagreement is the nature of the motivation underlying the cognition and other changes that result from dissonance. Another weakness is that the long-term effects of dissonance are unknown. All experiments have always been done in a questionnaire style, and the results were discovered right after the experiment. So the long-term effects were never known. It is also difficult to disprove the theory because it lacks testability. If the experiment fails, someone can just say that there just wasn't enough dissonance. Which leads into the next weakness, which is that theory does not include choice. Every individual is different, and they will experience different levels of dissonance based on what their morals are, their values, and whether or not they have a belief in God. But Festinger has an answer to this, which I'll read to you. It says in the original book that in order for dissonance to be large enough to exist, there has to be minimal pressure on the person to do what the person does. If there is too much pressure, there is too much justification for having done it, and it is all consonant with having done it. There is no dissonance. Doesn't that encompass the idea of choice? Isn't choice one part of that? Now on to some practical implications and applications within the communication discipline. Dissonance affects interpersonal relations or feelings toward a communicator and his communication. It also causes an increased commitment to groups and organizations. The reason for this is that if you took a long time and it was a really difficult process to get hired somewhere, you would probably rationalize even if you didn't like the job. You would convince yourself, I do like it, it's worth it, or the money is good. Because the idea of quitting causes dissonance because it took so long, it was so difficult to get hired. Dissonance also plays a substantial role in perpetuating and reducing conflict, which causes contradictory dialogue. For example, if two people were having a discussion about abortion, one person was on the pro-choice side and one person was on the pro-life side. A person on the pro-life side might assume that the person on the pro-choice side will not be open-minded to their discussion and will ignore everything that they say. It will cause dissonance if this person actually is open-minded and listen because it's contradictory to the belief that they held. One of the reasons I chose this theory is because I was curious about how it would fit into a biblical worldview. I compared cognitive dissonance to one's conscience. We can look at Romans 2:15. Who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them. We can also look at 1 Timothy 1:19. Having faith and a good conscience, which some having rejected concerning the faith have suffered shipwreck. I think you can compare those to cognitive dissonance. As a Christian, we have certain morals that we should uphold. When we go against them, we experience dissonance, or our conscience weighs heavy on us, and we can experience a shipwreck. In conclusion, we've discovered that dissonance is caused by an individual holding two contradictory ideas. The person will recognize these contradictory ideas that cause dissonance, and they will want to resolve it. Now, the theory is under much evaluation and scrutiny, but the backbone of cognitive dissonance still stands. Thank you.